Are the All Blacks in crisis? Crushing defeat against the Springboks in the Rugby Championship over the weekend. So what are your reflections on that game and where does it leave Scott Robertson's side at this moment in time? Welcome back to the channel. That's what I'm going to try and tackle in this video. The fallout to this game was always going to be absolutely massive, and looking at the New Zealand media and various videos on YouTube over the last couple of days since that game on Saturday, understandably, the fallout to it, the emotions, the views on this All Blacks team are pretty brutal, pretty opinionated and pretty heavy. So give me yours down below. In particular, if you're an All Blacks fan, where are you after this? Do you feel that this is a total reflection of where this side is? Was that a fair reflection of this All Blacks team and where they currently find themselves? And therefore you have major concerns, whether that will be selection, performance, coaching, personnel, whatever it might be. But actually that result and that performance reflects how good and where this team is. Or, and I think this is a totally fair feeling as well, do you think whilst the result was terrible and the team deserved criticism for it, does it also skew perhaps how people are currently viewing this side? I think both of those things are probably fair. Give me your views down below, because I think it is worth remembering here the impact of defeats and how reactionary we can all be, by the way, to certain games and one-off results. Because if you cast your mind back just a week or so ago, so much of the YouTube videos I saw, the headlines, the discussion points after Eden Park was how Scott Robertson and the All Blacks out-coached the Springboks, got the better of them. A week later, the Springboks have just had one of their greatest ever nights and are deservedly getting a lot of plaudits, and the All Blacks are all of a sudden being totally questioned, and they're in a meltdown almost in terms of New Zealand. I understand, it's why we love sport, right? The reactions, the emotions that it provokes out of us. But I think it is worth remembering that a week ago, our feelings were very, very different on both of these sides. And honestly, I was starting to look at the Springboks and thinking I should be doing a video titled, "How Concerned Should We Be About the Springboks?" And now that is kind of been put on the ash heap of history at the moment after that performance. So I think it's just worth remembering that. My views generally at the moment on the All Blacks, and specifically in relation to the question, are they in crisis? For me, no. I think this is still a very good New Zealand side, but they aren't as dominant as previous New Zealand sides. And they are a team that is developing. And I still look back at the World Cup a couple of years ago, and when you lose Aaron Smith, Sam Whitelock, Brodie Retallick, when Richie Mo'unga hasn't been available, they have lost real quality and real experience in that team. And I think they are trying to replace them. But it's also an All Blacks team that have beaten France the last few times they played them. All right, France took a third string team to New Zealand, so that's an important bit of context there, but what are the All Blacks meant to do about that? They've beaten Ireland the last two times they've played them, factoring in the World Cup quarter-final and then last year in Dublin. Unbelievable result, by the way, that one in Dublin. I think underappreciated and goes under the radar a little bit. That is not an easy place to go and win. So my point is, this is an All Blacks team that are still capable with mixing it with the best teams in the world. They beat the Springboks the week before, but they aren't as consistent as we've seen them be previously, which I think in particular for the All Blacks always means reactions to their defeats are stronger, because for most of us in our rugby watching lifetimes, we're not accustomed to seeing the All Blacks lose regularly. They are more fallible than previous All Blacks teams. They are developing, and so therefore I don't think they're in crisis. But having said that, that doesn't mean there aren't big questions about this side. And the Rugby Championship standings that I've had up on the screen there are a reflection of this at the moment, right? Because all of a sudden, you've got a New Zealand team that are third in the standings. A victory on the weekend, they would have been top and they would have been in the box seat to go on and win this competition. Now, who would you have? Maybe the Springboks probably as the favourites, even though they're second. The Wallabies top of the pile after 4 rounds, which is pretty extraordinary. And Argentina are bottom, but they're a point off New Zealand and South Africa and only 2 points off the Wallabies. It is a fascinating competition. But for New Zealand now, all of a sudden you're looking at where are they going to finish rather than necessarily are they going to be the champions come the end of the Rugby Championship. So there are big questions over this side. I thought I'd run through a few kind of key stats that I thought were interesting off the back of the weekend. When you look at the missed tackles for the All Blacks, 46 compared with 33 for the Springboks. Metres gained was extraordinary, really. I wonder how much this was impacted by the final 20 minutes. 262 for the All Blacks, 629 for the Springboks, and defenders beaten, 33 for the All Blacks, 46 for the Springboks. And then below the dotted line is turnovers conceded for the whole Rugby Championship. These stats, by the way, I'm taking off the Rugby Championship website. As loads of you will know, trying to find reliable rugby stats online is always a bit of a fool's errand, but that's where I've taken them from. Interesting to me that the Springboks have conceded 72 turnovers across the whole Rugby Championship compared with 57 for the All Blacks. But look, what are the big questions for the All Blacks then, I suppose? Because whilst I don't think they're in crisis, and I don't think, well, my reaction isn't as strong and as doom and gloom as maybe some would be, there are still fair questions. I think the bench was always going to be an issue for the All Blacks at the weekend. We spoke about it when we looked at the team news ahead of the game for the match in Wellington. The All Blacks bench compared with the Springboks wasn't as experienced. You always feared it wouldn't have as big an impact. Now, on the one hand, the bench for the Springboks didn't have the impact they maybe would have wanted because they had so many injuries early on in the game. So it wasn't necessarily just the last 20 minutes that the replacements were having to come on and steady the ship or have a really big positive influence on the match. But I still think the bench was a concern. And I think, in particular, selection is probably something you're going to look at off the back of the match. Getting those right combinations, it was always going to be an issue. I think it was an issue for the All Blacks. I've seen some people question the captaincy, which is an interesting one. The theory being that Ardie Savea should be the captain, who has been the All Blacks' best player for 4 or 5 years. He, in many ways, I feel, is close to the emotional heartbeat of that team. He's so consistent. He is the sort of player that I'd imagine if you're an opposition player, you fear coming up against Ardie Savea because he's so good. But I don't necessarily think that captaincy is the issue here. I don't think Scott Barrett's captaincy is the issue for why they ended up losing the game in the manner that they lost that game. I think Ardie Savea would be a very good choice as captain if you did decide to change, but I don't necessarily view that as fixing all of the problems here for the All Blacks. Questions in selection, I think, is a big concern and a big question. I mentioned the players that have departed post-World Cup. So you're always going to need to refresh the team. It's a natural process for any side, and particularly any international side midway between World Cups. I guess the concerns at the moment are, I don't know what a lot of the answers are to those questions in selection. What is the best centre combination? I quite like the fact that they have been sticking with Billy Proctor, but I don't necessarily know if that is the best option still going forward. What's the best combination in the back three? What's the best makeup of the back row and I suppose therefore the second row, because it depends if Tupu Vai is in the back row at 6 or in the second row. There are, I think, big selection questions that they're currently struggling to find the concrete answers to, which in between World Cup cycles I think is a concern. I think that is a concern for the All Blacks. And then I suppose the big one, if we're looking at game plan, particularly off the back of what we saw in Wellington, is the opportunities they are presenting to teams, the chances they are giving to teams to be able to hurt them. We saw that, and it was what South Africa did so well in that second half, to harm the All Blacks, cause them problems. I think that is a big concern at the moment for the opportunities that they're coughing up. And then obviously the set piece. I actually think when you play South Africa, your scrum in particular will get highlighted and scrutinised more than anyone else. I still think that the All Blacks, I still think they have an all right set piece. We'll see what it looks like against the Wallabies. I think against South Africa, a magnifying glass gets put on that area of the game. I suppose my point here in the video is I think there are legitimate questions over this team that they have to find answers for. I just don't necessarily think that they're in total crisis in the way that maybe some people would think of them as. What do you reckon? Does that make sense? Give me your views. That's kind of generally where I am with the All Blacks. Look, they play Australia twice now, which is a fascinating matchup. The Bledisloe on the line as well, like almost, what was it, 2.5 decades? 2.5 or two, just over almost 2.5 decades since Australia won the Bledisloe. They have a real chance of doing that, but I also think New Zealand have a real chance of winning both matches. And I think when you look at their Northern Tour coming up in a couple of months, what they've got, it's Ireland in Chicago, Scotland at Murrayfield, England at Twickenham, Wales in Cardiff. I still think they are capable of coming away with 3 or 4 wins out of that. I suppose the final point maybe, and that brings me on to it, is is international rugby currently more even than it has ever been? Because also that Northern Tour, I say they could win 3 or 4 games. I think that's totally possible. I also think they could lose a couple, and maybe it'd be one where they've won 2, lost 2, or something like that. Because I think at the very, very top level of international rugby, what we're seeing this year, I think the Rugby Championship, to bring back the table up once again, is a total reflection of this, is as even and as competitive as it's ever been. I think on their day, the All Blacks can mix it with anyone. I also think they have a few more chinks in their armour and weaknesses in their game, which means they can lose to Argentina. They can suddenly get blown away against the Springboks. Maybe they will end up losing to Australia in these games coming up. It's a really fascinating landscape, I think, international rugby at the moment. So give me your views. Like the video as well. I'd love it if you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a thing on the channel. And I'll see you in the next one.